We're being challenged today by technology. It's not the first time, Matt, I've been challenged. How are you doing? You're a little bored. I know you're a little bored. You're chairman of the board today.
Chairman of the board, BORED.
All right, Matt, we're hopefully going to have an awesome guest here in a little bit. Carol Roth, author of The War on Small Business, How the Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America. I can't wait to pick her brain on all things small business. You know, I've been a big advocate of support local for a long time, Matt. I know you know that my alter ego is one half Manja TV. And, we've been talking about the local multiplier for just about ever.
Hold on, new highs.
Just did. Anyway, so I can't wait to have Carol on. We had to send a new Zoom link. Let's hope that technology can be conquered. Matt, speaking of conquering, let's just bring up the Babylon Bee never ceases to it just delivers all the time on news. All right. New York Times slams Cuban protesters for waving notorious symbol of hate, the American flag. It's crazy how the narrative of one thing, all of a sudden, when you need the narrative to be something else, it's like, well, why did you have the other narrative going in the news of narratives instead of news of news? Anyway, what's going on in Cuba is just a beautiful illustration of top-down, state-run statism, Matt, statism versus true liberalism, right?
Yeah. And I think you could also make a claim that that's happening in South Africa today, too.
Statism. Right. It doesn't work.
Riots galore in South Africa.
Yeah. I mean, I read you know what I want to share, Matt, here. Let me share if I can.
Yeah, well, you got to hold on there, Turbo.
Yeah. I'm ready to hold on. Because we got to talk sports. There's a little bit of sports over the weekend that happened, Matt.
The only sports story that was interesting to me was Jim Furyk winning the senior U.S. Open with fluff on his bag. What a great story. By the way, how many do you think have won both regular U.S. Open and the senior U.S. Open? How many guys?
4.
8.
I got to tell you, I've been ice cold lately, so that doesn't surprise me that I only had it half towards correct.
That's a large group of men. That's a lot. I was surprised.
Well, you got to imagine too, like you hit that senior tour at 50, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so the guys that have been on it for you always see that the 50-year-olds come in and they fairly dominate early in that senior tour, and it's a diminishing return as you age, right?
Speaking of diminishing returns, let's take a look at some price action here before we get Carol on. Stock du jour, Richard Branson Co. Space.com. They went to space, Bob. They went to space. And the stock last week had a little rally because they were going to space, and they took a Wright brothers style plane that brought up their rocket, and then the rocket supposedly went to, what did I tell you?
56 miles, they said, Matt.
55 miles. So here was the action last week, all the way to 61 is where we were trading on the end of the month, 28th. We had a little rally back here to 54 last week, a couple times, 3 times. And then today they announced not only did they complete the flight, they were up for, an hour and a half cruising around the Wright brothers biplane, and then with a rocket attached to its butt. And then they came back and issued another $500 million in common shares. So that pretty much worked well for a marketing event, I guess, because nobody's going to space, as you say. And that whole thing was it was underwhelming to me.
Well, I thought the same thing, Matt. It's like,
And the price action speaks.
How are they going to
so you were broke, so you needed to get another $500 million into the coffers. Okay, you got it. That's what they did.
Bingo! Finally, technology. There we are. Hold on, connecting. Carol Roth. Man, I got to tell you, Carol, we were suffering through technology overload, and also our technology underload of capability.
That's more the story. That's more the problem.
No worries, no worries.
But we did it. We did it. Not quite a SpaceX launch.
But glad we're all here.
Absolutely. All right, Carol, I was just telling Matt on the way in here, as I was winding down my career on the trading floor, I actually started a little portal called manja.tv. At, the trading floor, a melting pot of ethnicities. And we talked a lot about food and music and sports when we weren't trading. But part of that developed into a strong understanding of small business, the local multiplier, and how important it is in building community. And it just blows me away how it's not being covered. And thank you so much for writing the book to expose just what's going on here. So let's just delve into it. The War on Small Business is your book. How did you come to writing it?
So I was actually approached by HarperCollins very early in the pandemic to do sort of an economic autopsy on what was clearly going to be a historic moment in terms of our economic history. And so going into it, first of all, foolishly, I agreed. I was like, oh, sure, that sounds interesting. I'm not traveling, so yeah, why not? Need something to do. Not realizing how challenging that would be with things, shifting and changing day to day, and then obviously information kind of leaking out, months after the fact. So when I went into it, I didn't really know exactly what the book was going to be about. I had some general theses, and certainly small business was at the forefront of that. Partly because I've been a small business expert and advocate on a worldwide basis for more than a dozen years. But even right up front, when you saw who was getting shut down first and who was getting taken care of, no pun intended, from the CARES Act and so on and so forth, it was really clear that, like has happened in history, everybody's for the little guy, but when push comes to shove, nobody's for the little guy. So I really knew that was going to be a piece of it. But didn't realize that what was going to end up happening with this government picking of winners and losers based not by science or data, but based purely on political clout connections in conjunction with the actions of the Federal Reserve, is that we were going to see the most epic wealth transfer in history from Main Street to Wall Street. So I wanted to really kind of not only underscore what happened in the last year, but kind of what's led up to that happening and what the potential consequences are if we don't turn that around. And that's how we ended up where we are today. And it's amazing to me, guys, that still, given the historic and epic proportions that we're talking about, how few people are really keyed into this. So, you would think it would be real great.
I have so many questions for you, Carol, because I'm sure there's a lot that are unanswered also, even with the book. But I've got to imagine, you could do a whole book just on the process of PPPs and how they were they, where were they distributed, how people got the money, did they get the money, will they have to pay them back? These are all the things that are in my head. And, I've got family that receive some of these loans, and I keep asking them because I'm like, will you have to pay it back, or how does that work? There's just so much going on that I think could really hinder a lot of these small businesses that maybe took money and maybe still have to pay it back. I don't know. It just seems very confusing, the whole process from day one.
Yeah, that's part of the intention, right? Is that they made it confusing. And I say it's intentional because they did not make it confusing for the Kennedy Center. They did not make it confusing for the airlines during Too Big to Fail. They did not make it confusing for the banks. But there were 35 rule changes between I think it was like the end of March and like the first 5 to 6 weeks of the program. And as you said, not only was the first tranche exhausted immediately, but a lot of small business owners didn't qualify. Some of them never qualified. Some got like crumbs. Some got like $1,000. Like, okay, thanks. That's going to help my business. And some of them just are still trying to sort through it. I mean, for many of them, they will get it forgiven. If you use contractors and you didn't have people on your traditional payroll, as many small businesses do, you may end up getting screwed over. So there are still a lot of questions. But the key is that this wasn't a bailout, and this wasn't like, traditional relief money. This wasn't the Too Big to Fail or the auto bailouts. This was eminent domain payment. This was the government has taken over your property for the public good. They've told you cannot work in whole or in part. They owed that money to the small business owners, and they did not give them nearly what was required to make up for the subjugation of their property rights. And so, when people talk about PPP as, oh, well, the small businesses were taken care of, that's what the media wants. That's what the government wants. They want you to think that. But when you dive into the details, that's nowhere near the reality. And they're still screwing them over. But
right. So what do you see, and then just in the last week or two, there's been a number of large lending institutions. Last week, it was Wells Fargo who said, hey, all these revolving lines of credit gone. And that, to your point, you brought this up early in your opening there, Carol. That's because of the Fed. I mean, if I can't make money lending you a revolving credit line because of these negative interest rates that are basically out there pushed to the banks, why would I even be in that business? I understand why the banks don't want to lend, but so that on top of what I'd like to hear some of the numbers that you've kind of, that you've seen and put together in the book, and kind of give us some macro views of what's the shape of things right now.
Yeah, well, I'm going to answer that in two pieces, because that first piece is super interesting with Wells exiting these personal lines of credit. And if you look what the government and the Fed has done in disrupting risk in the market, and some of the direct actions they've taken with shutting down small business, is they have clamped down on wealth creation opportunities in this country for the average American. So they can't buy a house, they can't invest in the stock market without taking on excessive risk. It's riskier to start a business. All these things where you get equity and ownership, and we know this better than the average American how important that is. They've disrupted that, made it much more difficult for the average American to gain wealth. So that's kind of the part of the macro story that I think everybody should really be focused on here. But when you're talking about some of the numbers, it's important to have these conversations because they're going to be obfuscated. There were, by the middle of June of 2020, per Harvard's Hamilton Project, more than 400,000 small businesses that had shuttered permanently. And just to give you a scope of that, and you guys, again, probably know this, but a lot of people don't, there's about 10 to 15,000 big businesses in this country. There's about 5,000 that are publicly traded. So when you're talking 400,000, that's 40 times the size of the entire big business market. The newest data is showing some ridiculous, almost 40% of small business closures. I dispute those numbers, knowing the small business numbers the way I do. My guess is that might be consumer-facing businesses or employer-owned businesses. So we could be talking 1 million or 2 million small businesses that close. But what's going to happen is, because there was so much stimulus money and so many people out of work looking for side hustles, a lot of people started up these little side businesses. And so you got millions of new businesses. So it's going to look like, oh, look, we didn't lose any businesses. Right. But when you lose family businesses that have been around for decades, or in some cases, we have one in Chicago that was 100 years that just closed. They survived prohibition as a bar, but couldn't survive government COVID mandates. and you replace that with, somebody selling masks to just get by, like that's not a good trade-off for the economy.
That's not a long-term business model. No,
No.
at all. Hey,
It
Bob?
is amazing too how I just think the what's going on in Cuba right now, that's the end game. Like if people don't understand that's the end game and that's the direction that the ship is pointing in a lot of ways, and that's what you get if you don't have liberty to create your own businesses. If the government can just say, hey, on really kind of, excuse my French, but shitty science, we got to close your business for the benefit of everybody. It's unbelievable. And I got to tell you, there's a economist at the UIC in Chicago there, Deirdre McCloskey. Do you know Deirdre?
I do. I know her by name. I think we've met before, but I'm maybe confusing her with somebody else, but I'm
She's
fairly
great.
certain we've done
I've
some
seen her
stuff together.
a few times on stage. And she talks, and I just I saw her again somewhere and did some, and what I love about her is her idea that liberalism, it means to liberate, and how that liberalism has been bastardized beyond recognition. Like I'm a liberal now when I read her definition of liberalism.
Classical liberal, right? That's what we all started as, classical liberals, and they've completely shifted the game. And I'm really glad that you brought up the Cuba situation, because it is fascinating when you see people screaming for freedom, choice, transparency, free markets, right? And waving the American flag, yet you have people here who are doing the opposite. The first thing is like, how do we get the exchange program going, right? How do we swap one out for the other?
Right.
But that's the issue, is, as I pointed out, you've got this kind of spectrum where half the economy is decentralized with, before COVID, 30.2 million small businesses. And then half the economy is in the hands of these like 10,000+ big businesses. And as we shift more power and control to them, we're also ending up shifting more power and control to their cronies, to the government, to special interests. And that sort of like unholy triumvirate is what's been taking over. And that's why they don't want us focused on this decentralized piece. That's why they are, whether you think they're too small to matter or too hard to control, that doesn't serve the purpose. And we have been moving along the spectrum. If you look at how much the government controls in terms of spend, what they've been doing to the dollar with the Fed, how many laws they've passed, the expansion of their purview. I mean, I would argue that socialism in large part is already here, and we're in a hybrid economy. And it's just a question of, are we moving towards the UK or France, neither of which are great outcomes, or do we go full Cuba or Venezuela? And if we don't start to pull that back, if we don't have the education and the awareness of what's happening, we are going to end up, very, very quickly, because the trajectory in terms of the spend and everything else and stuff that's very hard to undo is already moving in that direction.
I've said this for years, Carol, that, socialism began in this country under Roosevelt, FDR, and we're really at the end of that, the time frame, that 80 years, 90 years. 80 some years, let's just say, late 20s, that's coming to an end. And, I think that this is going to play out, and people aren't going to sit back and watch this happen. In my own life, like I had a chip in my Volvo, and I was trying to get have insurance, trying to get it replaced. I don't have the national safety light available to me where we live. We're kind of remote, away from Portland, 3 hours. So I have to go to a local company, which is not a problem, but they're so swamped, they can't hire people, right? It's that problem. And it's the same thing. I went to a restaurant last night. I just wanted to go sit and have a salad in the bar where normally you can just sit in there, walk in. I don't have, I was with a friend, and we couldn't get a table. We had to wait for the hostess, and then there's no wait people. So, and then on top of that, I was paying $34 for a Cobb salad. I was like, whoa, like,
Yeah.
where,
Yeah.
like, so you just pile all that on, and you're like, it felt kind of like I was in Cuba. And this is to your point, you want to send that kid who was, going viral over the weekend, pulling out the American flag as he's riding down the street with his mom and throwing it on the ground. Dude, Like, what are you teaching 8-year-olds? Like, to stay at home and collect a check from the government, and that's going to be okay? How is that going to, lead to progress in this country? So I agree with you. Let's send them on a little, home and home to Cuba and back, or to Venezuela. If you want to go to Caracas, it'll be even more fun. You want to see what real fun is.
Yeah, it's incredible. The long tail effects, as you were mentioning, are really devastating. So you have these small businesses that have already been shut down by government mandate. They've somehow scraped by to survive. They probably have personal debt. They've probably taken their own pay cuts. Now
Right.
they have to compete with the government for workers. They can't get supplies because the entire supply chain is broken. And then
Yep.
you're gonna have a bad experience. Matt walks in, he has, he can't get served his salad for 3 hours. He's like, I'm
Right.
not going back there again. I mean, that's not a good outcome for the small business either. Again, of no fault of their own. And this is the part of the cycle that we're in today, that obviously, I had to cut my book off somewhere that, wasn't quite captured, but you can see these long tail effects. And I think it's going to be quite some time before we get back. And I just don't know how many of the small business owners survive that.
Well, I mean, for
Yeah, I
sure,
mean-
too. I'd always thought too that part of, like, going back to my evolution on this and the local multiplier and supporting small businesses, there's just not a lot of great education about that. Like, if people understood that they go to McDonald's and for every dollar they spend, like 96 cents of that leaves their community forever. If they really understood that, they'd make different decisions. I think. I know I started making a lot better decisions around that once I had all those facts. Carol, you're in Chicago, yeah?
I sure am. What a treat.
Because when I
What a
started
treat,
to-
guys.
We quit Chicago. Matt quit Detroit. I quit Chicago. Anyway, but Andersonville in Chicago is a great example of communities really taking action to push a local agenda and to support local. But it's far and wide. And who is advocating for small businesses at the national level?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, is that there really aren't any. And that's, again, partially because small businesses are so independent. But you do have a cabinet position in the SBA that is supposed to be there and to be the voice of small business. And it seems to be, and this is not a specific to this administration, this is sort of how it's happened, is that the administrator runs around and takes photo ops at small businesses and then doesn't do anything to actually help small businesses. I mean, I've got almost 3,000 minority and women-owned businesses that have had members of that cohort contact me, say that they were granted relief funds from this, Restaurant Relief Fund Act that the administration put out. They were told how much their grants were. I have a woman who was $57,000 and change that she was going to get. They confirmed the bank account. They said it'll be in there for 3 to 7 days. Then it was found out that the SBA discriminated in the way that it chose who was going to get the funds. And so instead of going back and saying, listen, we need more, small businesses need more, and we're talking about billions out of the multiple trillions that we've spent on a bunch of nonsense, instead of doing that, they pulled the funding from almost 3,000 minority and women-owned businesses and said, sorry. I mean, these are the people who are supposed to be advocating for small business in Washington under the party that's supposed to care about the little guy. So, I mean, there you go.
Well, we talk all the time about the age of, Carol, there was the Iron Age, right? There was the information age. This is the age of irony, and it just keeps showing up over and over and over again. The irony of what goes on. How about you just give all those people the money and then have a redo and address the problem?
Right.
I mean, that's what any logical person would do.
Right. Again, and it's not only a fraction of what they're spending on all kinds of stupid stuff, but a fraction of what they deserve, again, under eminent domain. I mean, I'm not a socialist. I'm not somebody who likes government bailouts. These are not bailouts. This is a government shut down your business by mandate. that's not American. We have a constitution that says you can't do that.
Right.
So the fact that they're not even like attempting to try to make it right, and the small business owners in many cases don't know what to do. They don't have the heft. I've directed several of them towards some of these lawyers who handle lawsuits, infringements on your rights for free. So, we'll see if that starts to take hold. I've heard about some coming out of Minnesota and whatnot. And it sucks for all of us, because at the end of the day, we know the government doesn't even have any money, right? It's our money, or they're printing it and devaluing our money. One of the two ways we're paying for it. So
I'm curious how you see it playing out. What are some positive things that you see that could happen, Carol, and what are some not so positive? You have to. As a risk manager myself, that's what I have to look at. Like,
right.
what could happen either way, and I'm curious, with all the information and time you spent, down these holes, what do you like? And then also, there's so much that is pointing to me that this is going to happen again, because you're seeing that they're already shutting down in Australia, New Zealand. They've never really opened in Europe, except for the soccer game. But besides that, like, nothing's really like. So, what do you see happening? I'm curious, because I'm trying to figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah, again, so this isn't a good story, but just in terms of like what's a realistic story, you're already starting to see it. Those who are quote unquote large small businesses, or that are made up of a conglomeration of small businesses, are going to have a leg up against the independents. We've seen that if you are a chain restaurant, you're going to have the wherewithal and access to capital to probably withstand what's going on, whereas your local independent restaurant is not. So I would imagine, if you are making bets in that area, looking at a place where some of these guys will have the opportunity to unfortunately crush their competition. It's not a happy story. It's a bad story, but that's the outcome of it. You will have new businesses start, and unfortunately, I don't think enough people have spent time assessing the risk. So I don't know what the long tail on that is. And then the $30 trillion question is, what happens with the Fed? And do they do the right thing and start raising interest rates, which obviously paints the government into a corner and means that we're going to have to really have a come to Jesus there on spending, because obviously more of our dollars are going to go towards interest service. Or are they just going to continue to hold tight and find these ridiculous kind of headline things to hide behind and go, no, we don't have inflation. Look, everything's great. Look at the bond market. Oh, well, we happen to be buying in the bond market. That's why yields are going down. Those kinds of things that they can hide behind and just get us to the point where this whole thing blows up spectacularly. And I'm sure you guys have discussed this ad nauseum, but there's like 12 different scenarios, like one being zombie apocalypse, and one being that, like, because we're the skinniest kid at fat camp, they all just sit around and go, well, let's just cancel the debt. We owe most of it to ourselves anyways. Let's just exit off and get everyone to sign up. I don't know. Like, there's so many.
Yeah, but this administration could have done that already with, that they talked all through the campaign that they're going to do it for, student loans. And they've totally said, we're not going to do any of it. So it's showing me that to your point, that they realize that their backs are against the wall, and they can't do any, like, they're not, they're literally, they're swamp creatures, man.
Yeah, well, and that's the other problem too, is that because we have this, crazy sort of scenario we're in because of monetary policy, and the policies coming out of the Biden administration are all anti-competitive and anti-growth, that do we end up with something that looks more like stagflation? I think that's probably, at least in the interim, a real possibility, that the economy kind of sputters out, doesn't find its footing. Some of these small businesses can't hire. You get some sort of a tax increase or rejiggering along the way. That's just nothing that's going to spur innovation and growth. But you have the outgrowth of all of this monetary policy, and so. and the government interfering with the labor markets. So, is that, I think, do you spend a couple of years with stagflation and
right?
what's
And
the
you say, and again, like I say this to Bob every day, as long as you don't include your housing, your healthcare, your food costs, your energy costs, there is no inflation, right?
and the stock
But-
market, right?
And the stock and every asset, right? Every asset, you want to rent a house, it's through the roof. You want to buy a house, it's unaffordable, even with the interest rates at zero.
Yeah, you can't even buy a depreciating asset anymore.
No, there's nothing depreciating except for gold, which again makes absolutely zero sense. Well, I'm curious, your take on the employment piece, because I was an econ major, and this is like the weirdest. There's no common sense anymore. There, you can take away all your, supply demand charts and go, huh? How come people aren't working? Well, because like you said, Carol, they're being subsidized by the government to stay home, to continue to. I mean, how many of our states, I guess, now are still paying the additional, unemployment, yet everybody's dying for, it just, again, where has the common sense gone that these people, they're not pushing them back to work? All we talk about is vaccinations, and I'm tired of it. So like,
Yeah.
how do we get the government to realize, I don't think they're that smart, honestly.
So there's the incompetence argument, and then there's the intention that this is really all a test run for universal basic income and a further consolidation of government power and moving us, more in that direction that we were talking about earlier. They're conditioning people to devalue the dignity of work. They're conditioning people to believe the government is going to be there and hand them a check or hand them a subsidy or, whatever it is. So there are going to be more and more people who just say, well, yeah, that sounds good. And when you get a big enough cohort of that, then you have the support to start passing things like UBI. And so that's really the big concern here. In the short term, if you're somebody who's out of the labor force and has been out of the labor force and has gotten a supplemental money, and it's like July and it's the summer, like you're not going back to work until after Labor Day. If you're somebody who has
down the river, they're floating down the river here in Bend, Oregon, and they're from every state. They're all here on vacation, believe me.
Yeah, if you have kids who haven't been allowed to go back to school because of the teachers' unions, your kids aren't getting back to school until fall, if they let them come back in fall. So you're not going back to the labor market if you need that, as part of your child care. So, I don't see any to move towards normalization until maybe the fourth quarter. But I do think there's going to be a lot of people who are just like, I'm going to sit around and see if we can maybe wrangle up some more checks and whatever. And as you said, on the state, I think it's 26 have opted out. So it's almost 50-50. 26 have opted out and the other ones have stayed in. And, they're also, I'm here in Illinois where there's a lot of financial crises. I still think some of them are looking for a federal bailout, and they're trying to make the case, oh, look, our economy's sputtering. We're having a hard time coming back. We need more money as a way to make up for their pension woes. So, I think there's a lot.
Said that from day. It's funny that you bring that up because I've said that from day one. This was all about, and that will be the next thing that's pulled, by the way. Yeah. And I keep telling people, I don't care if you were a fireman for 30 years and did a great job, your pension's going to be gone. And this could be.
By the way, Matt, with the history, growing up in Detroit and seeing it firsthand, these aren't just idle words.
No. This will be the thing that I think that if they try to jam that down people's throats, that they will revolt. It won't happen because there are so many unfunded pensions. California's is 165 billion, or even Oregon, small little Oregon population wise, I think, is pushing 100 billion, underfunded. Where's that money going to come from?
And this is all.
You got an ex-football coach who, coached 3 years and because of the formula of PERS in this crazy, blue state of Oregon, they take your highest 2 years and then they average them and they give you that until you die. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So the football coach is getting paid like $1.2 million cash, tax-free every year.
We're all in the wrong business. We're all in the wrong business. But, that's one of the things I have in my book. And I don't know if you remember it from outside of that, was one of the craziest things that happened like pretty early on last year was Ben Meng, who at the time was the interim CIO of CalPERS, which is the largest pension, obviously a public pension in the United States, went and did an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal basically saying, we need you to keep rates low. We need to keep up this artificial thing. Otherwise, like, we're not going to be able to make our we're not going to be able to make our returns. And like, I mean, talk about unprecedented. I've never seen anything like that before.
See, you're with me now, though, Carol. The age of irony. It's all over the place. Now that you know that we're living the age of irony, you're gonna see it everywhere you look. Well, this is Carol's book, The War on Small Business, How the Government Used the Pandemic to Crush the Backbone of America. I got to tell you what, though, I am generally a positive and hopeful person. And I think the American fighting spirit, by and large, does not like the direction we're going. I think that, if anything, this has just crystallized and focused for everybody what the top-down approach looks like. And I just think that there's going to be a major pushback. That's just my thought. Like, people care too much about what we've done, how far we've gotten, and I don't care how much they try to spew the negative rhetoric about what's going on in this country. The good far and away outweighs the bad. And thank you so much.
It's worth fighting for. It's worth fighting for. The principles are worth fighting for. I want to be as hopeful as you. There are a lot of people who feel this way. There are a lot of really smart people who refuse to see this. The partisan politics has gotten in the way of just looking at principles and looking at reality. And there's so many people who just want to say, orange man bad, this person bad, whatnot. It's like, okay, fine, great, but just can we like that's like the sideshow of it. Can we focus on what's happening? Because you're out here counting your Donnie dollars and your Biden bucks, and they're driving the Brinks truck behind you with all the money. Like, I need you to focus and pay attention here.
Yeah, again, and we see it. We live in we're fortunate to live in a beautiful place that a lot of people want to come visit. They want to live, and that has changed, but it's such. Bob uses irony and ambiguity, and that's where we are. The strange thing is, like, real estate, I've seen properties for $1,500 a square foot, and this in the middle of Central Oregon where I live. That's insane. It's like Malibu prices, right? And then on the same side, you step off the main drag of retail, where the Home Depot, the Lowe's, Costco, Target, right? What were the problems that we're talking about are all located. And then the street right behind them, we have literally, Bob, how many do we have? Like 200 RVs and broke down trucks that are parked there because these people have nowhere to go. Like, in the same community, right? And again, if I went back to Detroit, I can tell you, and I was there last time in February, I can tell you, it doesn't look like this. It's more the side of the RVs broke down everywhere still, and it's not fully recovering. And I'm sure, Carol, you're there in Chicago. It's got to feel really strange. And I love Chicago. I think
it's awful. I mean, I grew up in Chicago. I've chosen to live here. Never have I had a really bad feeling about the city. Like, I'm really angry with the city and kind of all of it, what it's become. We've been joking around here that we didn't like Rahm Emanuel as mayor here, and everyone wanted him out. And then we're like, oh man, what would we give to have Rahm Emanuel back? Like,
how about that? How about that? I mean, Rahm, say whatever you want, but Rahm wanted to break the Chicago's teachers union. He understood that the way forward in education in Chicago was to break the Chicago teachers union.
Yeah. So, but here, I want to just acknowledge and appreciate you guys. Obviously there is this sort of battle that's going on between Main Street and Wall Street. And I think too many people, and we've all been, on the Wall Street side of things, there are too many people on the Wall Street side who don't realize that what they're doing is not good for them too. Like, they think that, okay, we're grabbing all the dollars and not realizing sort of the long trajectory. You go back to Henry Ford, like, you need to make have the customers to buy things. And so if
Right.
you want to continue to have this prosperity, like you need to pay attention to that other part of the economy, and you can't just be so piggy and like go for another X% increase in like the 7 tech companies that gained $3.4 trillion in value last year. Oh, by the way, about the same amount that the Fed had printed at that point in time. Like
Right.
those kinds of things like don't work out well for anyone, you included, over long trajectories. So I'm thrilled that folks like yourself are making the time to share this and to get people focused on how important it is for economic freedom for everybody.
Carol, we believe in the free market, and with free markets come sometimes great volatility. And so I could, to your point, the last 2 or 3 months, really since Biden took office, has been horrible. I mean, the markets are just one way. There's nothing to trade. There's nowhere to buy, and you can't sell because it just goes up every day. So I'm with you. I'm literally sitting on my hands more and more. And I'm not saying in my 33 years I haven't felt this feeling before, and
Sure.
it hopefully will too pass. But right now it feels like it's forever. Like
But here's what I will say is in your 33 years and in my 26 or whatever it's been years, we've never had a scenario where we've had a central bank intervene at the level and duration that we've seen what's come out of the Fed, and then obviously on a worldwide basis as well. It's not like the ECB's been hanging out as well. So we have no sort of data point or benchmark. This is like a really wild experiment, and I don't mean wild in like an interesting way.
No, I'm with you. And you have to go back to pre-Greenspan to have somebody that was willing to raise rates, and that was in the 70s when we had some inflation. I mean, geez, I mean, if somebody had some guts right now, they could step in and just raise it a couple percent. That would take the glow off everything, and it would make people wake up, which is always a good thing. I mean, Paul Volcker really saved in the 70s. We could have, oil could have been $2 back then, but because he raised interest rates and got aggressive, it put the kibosh on the the whole 87 move. And then Greenspan came in and started where we are today. I mean, we're now 35 years deep, which is, again, in my opinion, the second half of this socialism reign of 70, 80 years that's really coming to an end. And I think it's not, we're getting to the point where
well, the question is, Matt, does it come to an end violently, or is there a possibility that they could put the needle in ever so slightly and drain the air out of the giant balloon, or is
the soft landing?
Well, listen. Here, I always believe this, Bob. I believe that sell-offs are an opportunity for capital to be put to work, whether it's me or whether it's Warren Buffett or whether it's Carol or whether it's you, Bob. So if, housing, I have not, there's so many assets right now that I have no interest, absolutely zero interest in owning. I want to short them, but fundamentally, I want to, but technically I can't. So I'm literally handcuffed and going, what am I going to do? Am I going to, are you going to open up a restaurant and have $25 salads and hope that model works? I mean, it just doesn't
sounds like a food truck idea to me, Matt.
I don't know.
The salad guy.
I mean, it goes back to sort of theses, right? And I've been telling small business owners, don't do anything that's in a box, which, by the way, I've been telling them for a while. And then don't do anything that requires for you to have a fixed workforce. Use contractors, use scalability, and it's going to shift, how people do business, because the risk reward profile for, having a traditional business is so disrupted, by government intervention at this point that I don't even know how you would possibly make a return on your investment.
I would even say to you, talking to a couple CEOs of some decent sized tech companies here in Bend that I know well, 300, 400 employees that, we're housing them all in one building. They pretty much had the whole building leased. During the pandemic, I mean, he decided, you know what? These guys aren't going to come back to work. And he made the decision, and he had a great year because of it. But what happens next year when they're all at home and you can't take that deduction that you just took every year because you still have a lease? It's not as big as it was, But that's also a transition that is, I think, keeping people afloat right now, Carol,
Yeah.
that will come to roost, because even once all those people that are staying home aren't going to come back to work, you still have a nut that you need to pay for. Yet is your level of output and production as high as it was before? Nobody knows. I don't know. I mean, he doesn't know, but it's got to be a little scary, but at least he's cutting his costs. But that's, that's again, shifting the burden, as you said, wealth transformation back to the little guy, and making him have to, buy his coffee now at home instead of having the free coffee at least at work. I mean,
Yeah.
it becomes really tricky.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is not the most optimistic discussion.
No, I
But, like,
know.
if you go down the road, and again, I talk about some of these things in the book, but even something like just the levels of non-financial corporate debt, like at the time I wrote the book, it was just a hair shy of $18 trillion. A lot of that in zombie companies that, can't service the interest on their debt, let alone the principal. So there's a lot of like really funky things that like
Are we
no one's
becoming
really
like that?
paying attention to. And it's just sort of unclear which of those are going to be like, the domino to fall. But there's a lot of like just, pretty crazy interrelated stuff that has come from central planners. And, the Fed is a central planner, our government's central planners, they have all gotten more powerful, and it's been to our detriment.
Right.
I love talking about the craft beer market and how it's a perfect example. When you take government out of the way, when you take restrictions and laws off of the books that prohibit self-distribute, self-determination, it's amazing what happens. I don't know why do we have to keep relearning this lesson? Like, people want to work hard, people are intelligent, people are creative, and the government isn't. I mean, it's been proven time and time again. And
the pandemic proved exactly what you were saying. So think about when we ran out of hand sanitizer from like the 3 people who were allowed to make it. And they said, well, fine, there's no more rules. And like within a week, there was hand sanitizer back on the shelf. The same thing with, nurses. Like they had people who, couldn't, shortages in certain states. So they said, okay, we're going to waive the restriction. You can go across state lines, whatever. And then they filled the shortage. Like, the free market works. Like, we have all the data and all of history and all of time that it does, and going in the other direction, all the data and all of history and all of time that it doesn't. And this shouldn't be complicated. And unfortunately, it just is.
All right, Carol. Well, thank you so much for the generosity of your time. We really appreciate it. We are a small business. Market Vitals, Matt and I, a startup here. I just thank you so much for spending some time with us. I really appreciate it.
And I bet you're going to do it. I bet you're going to do a follow-up. So keep us in mind when you're tossing around the next subject matter or the continuation of the subject matter, because there's obviously tons of follow-up information that's going to be coming out on this small business subject. So we appreciate it.
I think that the limiting of wealth creation opportunities, not just for the small business, but for the average American, is going to be a really big deal. And Bob, as you said, like, I don't know if that rallies us all together in a good way to get the government out of the way, or if people misconstrue that and it pushes us further, into central planning and socialism. I'm hoping for the former, but Lord, I don't know.
All righty, Carol.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
All right, Matt, we lost your video about a quarter of the way through there. So we still haven't tackled technology completely.
I don't know what's going on, Bob. Yeah.
But
the market's closed at what? All-time highs. So there you go. It's pretty much a guaranteed prospect every day that you will see all-time highs in the SPOOs. So keep on keeping on, as Carol, it's just crazy. I mean, it's literally crazy. We don't, we had one sell-off for, 1.5% or so, and now we're just back to the top.
All right, man, let's just cover the sports just for a second. I love that you shared this article. How crazy is this? Maxie Muncy, born August 25th, 1990, drafted by the A's in 2012. A different Maxie Muncy, born August 25th, 2002, drafted by the A's in 2021. It doesn't get any better than that. I love the fact that Italy beat those, the pompous English. It's nothing I like more than seeing an Englishman with his head down, right?
Well, and as an Italian, I was I could care less about soccer, but they looked like they were having a good time out there, and they looked like they were going to kick some ass. And I turned the game on when it was 1-0 England, and I was like, oh boy, here we go. And then they ended up winning in the shootout. Crazy.
Giannis dominates. I mean, a 20-point victory.
Instead of the Phoenix fans counting the dribbles, now the Milwaukee fans count, or they say they scream MVP as he's dribbling. I don't think that worked any better for him, but
this was a better game. Lionel Messi at bringing the one thing he hadn't had was an international trophy. Congratulations to Messi. The guy is. His soccer is not messy, I'll tell you that. And look at this COVID super spreader event going on in Buenos Aires. Congratulations. Who do we got left in Wimbledon besides you and I in the losers bracket?
Djokovic won. I had Barty to win, so I lost my bet there, but I did not have money on Djokovic. I had Barty. So, or not Barty. I had the other guy against Djokovic. Barty is the female winner. So, but I had the guy. I had the guy that made it to the semi, but he could not. Djokovic is just too darn good.
Right on. I know I had one other thing to share on that, but I can't remember it. Oh, I was going to share the left ankle, or I think it was his left or right ankle.
Yeah, it was the left ankle break.
Left ankle. Conor McGregor goes down in the first round. It's just in a Joe Theismann manner, just brutal.
I mean, just wrap it up, dude. Didn't you get paid enough in these last couple of fights? Wrap it up.
All right, man. We're gonna leave with the why, the actual why on crypto. Matt, this is from Varner Sports. Gary Vaynerchuk. He has signed Justin. I can't pronounce it. Justin and Jason, both with your nemesis, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
Yeah, I don't.
For NFT. Money making. Let's just call it what it is. Making money. That's what they're looking to do. Make money. College football players signing with Vaynerchuk Sports. That's the why. You like if they get paid and they get paid in Ethereum for their.
Again, I think that the problem with all this stuff is everybody's going to get their Vaynerchuk guy, and they're not going to be paying attention to what's going on in the field. They're all going to be basically doing
their TikTok videos, like your roller derby girl.
I'm kind of old school. I like my college sports the way it was. I don't want all this muddling it up, but I understand it. I'm not saying it's going to, and honestly, I don't think it's going to work that great for most guys. So it's going to be a waste.
Again, at the end of the day, like if somebody's not being able to buy something, right?
Yep.
You have to actually make money at it.
I mean, sell your Hutchinson 97 jersey from the University of Michigan. That guy's trying to do that. I'm like, you're not that good. I wouldn't spend $250 on your jersey.
And man, in the age to leave it today with the age of ambiguity, again, this shared inside marketvital's.io, the market breadth, I mean, 46% trading below their 50-day moving average, yet all-time highs every day. I don't get it. Age of irony, Matt.
Well, it's 10% of the stocks. It's kind of like the story Carol's saying. This is what people don't get. And this is why the indices sometimes are misleading. And that's why they're difficult to trade if you don't understand what is driving them. And right now, what's driving the spoos is just a handful of stocks. Matter of fact, I mean, I look at the down list and stocks I track every day, a lot of red on the screens every day, not just today, but a lot of red on the screens and big red. So you're seeing a lot of these names that, although they may be a part of, as you said, the S&P 500, they're sitting grinding near the top. A lot of them. I mean, we talked about it. Costco keeps going higher, but then you got MicroStrategies down $40 today again. So the Bitcoin story is not looking good. Newegg jumped up to 79. It's back to 38, cut in half. Lulu down $9 today. Again, you're seeing some big kind of we're biding time. Like we're back to, most all these stocks, although we're back to all-time highs, they're not ringing it. This does not feel like 99, 2000 to me at all. It's completely different and it feels different. And I don't know how long it goes on, but I don't think it can go on forever, Bob, but it might go on until 2022. Honestly, it could keep going. I mean, how long has it been already? It's been 12 years. So in my 33 years, excuse me, I've never seen a 12-year run like this. across.
Yeah, minus COVID. That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yep. And
All right, Matt, thank you so much.
Yep.
Hey,
Appreciate
please join us at marketvitals.io. Please share and retweet the broadcast. Thank you to Carol Roth for sharing her time and her knowledge about the war on small business. And let's go, America. Let's support local as much as possible. Understand what that the local multiplier means.
Yeah,
Once
and
you
remember,
understand it, you're going to make different decisions. I guarantee you that.
where
All right,
one
Matt,
goes,
thank you.
we all go. Where one goes, we all go, bud.